Riley Owens pressed her forehead against the cold window of the last train home, the city lights blurring into golden smears as the train rattled through the night. She hated this part of her day alone, exhausted after a 10-hour shift at the diner, wearing a thin jacket that did nothing against the late autumn chill. Everyone else in her life seemed to be moving forward while she was stuck, riding the last train home, night after night. Across the aisle, a man in a dark, tailored coat watched her over the top of his book. His name was Asher Nolan, though Riley had no way of knowing that. She definitely didn't know he was a millionaire either. To her, he was just another passenger, handsome, sharply dressed, with a kind of quiet, magnetic pull that made her stomach twist when their eyes accidentally met for a split second. She dropped her gaze fast, embarrassed. Guys like him didn't look at girls like her. Not ones who could barely afford rent and whose idea of a luxury meal was adding extra cheese to her burger. But Asher kept glancing up from his book, unable to help himself. There was something about her, the way she hugged her threadbare jacket tighter around herself, the tired slump of her shoulders, the stubborn lift of her chin that hooked into him hard. When the train jolted suddenly, Riley's bag slipped off the seat beside her, spilling its contents onto the floor. "Crap," she muttered, dropping to her knees to gather her things. Before she could reach for her phone, a hand beat her to it. "Here," the man said, his voice low and warm. Riley looked up and froze. Up close, he was even more devastating. Dark hair that curled slightly at the edges, a strong jaw, deep gray eyes that looked like they could see right through her. "Thanks," she managed, taking the phone from him. Their fingers brushed, sending a tiny jolt up her arm. "No problem," he said, smiling in a way that made her heart thud dangerously. The train lurched again, and Riley stumbled into the seat. The man chuckled quietly and sat back down across from her. She turned her face to the window, cheeks burning. "Get a grip, Riley. He's just being nice." But Asher didn't go back to his book. He watched her, studying the way she chewed her lip and stared out at the night like she was trying to escape her own life. When the announcer called her stop, Riley stood, tugging her bag over her shoulder. "Have a good night," she said to him, not knowing why she bothered. "You too," Asher replied, his voice deeper, softer. She hurried off the train before she did something stupid like ask his name. Asher watched her disappear onto the deserted platform, a strange ache building in his chest. He didn't even know her, but something about her loneliness called to him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this drawn to someone. Most people were interested in his money, his name, his connections. She didn't even glance back. For the first time in a long time, Asher felt something real crack open inside him. The next night, Riley got off work even later. She barely made it onto the last train, dropping into a seat with a groan. She didn't notice him at first until she heard the familiar rustle of pages and looked up. There he was, across the aisle. Same coat, same book, same quiet, unreadable expression. Her heart tripped. Was he following her? No, she was being ridiculous. This was New York, millions of people, hundreds of trains. Coincidences happened. Still, when their eyes met again, it didn't feel like a coincidence. He smiled. Small, just for her. Riley swallowed hard and looked away. She didn't have time for this. She needed to focus on finding a second job, paying her overdue rent, figuring out how to stop her life from spiraling. But when the train jolted and she pitched sideways, a hand reached out, steadying her gently by the elbow. "You okay?" he asked. Riley nodded, her throat tight. "Yeah." "Thanks, I'm Asher," he said simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world to introduce yourself to strangers on a train. She hesitated. "Riley. Nice to meet you, Riley," she laughed under her breath. "Yeah, it's a real party on the midnight train." Asher's mouth tilted up. "Best party I've been to all week." She shook her head, amused despite herself. They didn't talk much after that, but something shifted. A fragile thread spun between them, almost invisible but definitely there. When her stop came, she stood up and hesitated. Asher looked up at her, waiting. "Maybe I'll see you tomorrow," she said awkwardly. His smile was slow, sure. "I'll be here." By the third night, Riley brought 2 cups of cheap diner coffee onto the train. She hesitated by his seat, suddenly shy. "Peace offering," she said, holding one out. He took it, their fingers brushing again. "What are you apologizing for? Just..." Existing, she joked weakly, his eyes softened. You don't have to apologize for that. She sat down across from him, heart hammering so hard she thought he might hear it. They talked more this time. About books, about movies, about stupid things like the merits of pineapple on pizza. Riley kept waiting for the part where he'd lose interest, where he'd realize she was nothing special, a broke waitress with dreams she couldn't afford. But Asher just leaned in closer, like everything she said mattered. When she mentioned working 2 jobs, he frowned. That's rough. It is what it is, she said with a shrug. He studied her for a long moment. You deserve more, Riley. She opened her mouth to argue, but the train screeched to a stop at her station. See you tomorrow, he asked, standing too. She nodded, smiling before she could stop herself. Yeah, see you. As she walked down the platform, she felt lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she thought. What Riley didn't know was that after she disappeared into the night, Asher pulled out his phone not to text, but to call his driver to meet him discreetly at the next station. He didn't need to be on the train. He could have been home hours ago in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, but he stayed, every night, just to see her. Because somewhere between the first spilled bag and the second shared coffee, Asher Nolan, the millionaire no one ever said no to, had started falling for the girl across the aisle, hard, fast, and without a safety net, and he had no idea how to tell her. The 4th night, Riley almost didn't make it to the train. The diner had been short-staffed, and her manager, with that impatient look he always wore, had cornered her by the swinging kitchen doors. You want extra hours or not, Owens? She needed the money. Every part of her screamed yes. But when she glanced at the flickering clock above the register, her pulse kicked up. She thought of Asher waiting on the train, the way his gaze made her feel like she wasn't just another face in the crowd. I can't tonight, she said, surprising even herself. Now, sprinting through the near-empty station, her breath puffing in quick, frantic clouds, she cursed every slow pedestrian and broken escalator. She burst onto the platform just as the doors started to close, catching them with her elbow and squeezing inside. Asher was there. Same seat. Except this time he stood when he saw her, tension easing from his shoulders. You made it, he said, voice rougher than usual. Barely, she panted, sliding into the seat across from him. I think I knocked over a tourist, he laughed, a low, genuine sound that made something warm uncurl inside her. They rode a few silent minutes, the train rattling around them. Riley studied him from beneath her lashes. Tonight his coat was open, revealing a dark sweater that clung to a lean frame. His watch gleamed under the harsh train lights, sleek, understated, probably worth more than her monthly rent. Long day, he asked, noticing her scrutinizing him. You could say that. She leaned back, tipping her head against the window. My boss tried to guilt-trip me into staying late, again. Did you tell him where to shove it? She snorted. Tempting, but I like being able to pay for groceries. He tilted his head as if weighing something. You ever think about doing something else? She turned to him fully. Like what? I don't exactly have a resume that screams hire me. Maybe you just need someone to take a chance on you. She narrowed her eyes playfully. Are you offering me a job, Asher? His lips twitched. Maybe, she laughed, the sound surprising both of them. It had been too long since she'd laughed like that, full and unguarded. What about you? She asked, nudging the conversation away from herself. You never say much about your day. He hesitated, fingers drumming lightly against his coffee cup from last night, which he still carried like a habit. It's complicated like you're a spy, she teased. Something like that, he said, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. She sensed the deflection but didn't push. Everyone had their secrets. The train screeched through another station without stopping, and Riley watched the graffiti blur past. Asher shifted forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. What's your dream, Riley? She blinked. No one had ever asked her that before, not seriously. I used to want to open a bakery, she said after a moment, surprised the words slipped out so easily. Nothing fancy. Just a little place where people could sit and drink coffee and eat something that felt like home. His eyes lit with interest. Why didn't you? She shrugged, feeling the old familiar ache. Life got in the way. That's not a good enough reason, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tell that to my bank account. Asher didn't smile this time. He studied her like he was memorizing every line of her face, every shadow behind her words. "I think you could still do it," he said, voice low and certain. She shook her head. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." The train began to slow, her station approaching. She stood reluctantly, hoisting her bag over one shoulder. Asher rose too, stepping closer than usual. Close enough that she caught the clean, expensive scent of his cologne, something subtle and devastating. "Walk you to the stairs," he offered. She hesitated, then nodded. They exited together, their steps matching easily. The station was nearly deserted, just the hum of vending machines and the distant clatter of maintenance crews. At the foot of the stairs, Riley turned to him. "Thanks for the company." He looked like he wanted to say something else, something important, but instead he just nodded. "Good night, Riley." "Good night, Asher." She climbed the stairs, resisting the urge to look back. Behind her, Asher watched until her silhouette disappeared into the night. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over a contact labeled with one word, driver. He didn't call him yet. Instead, he leaned against the cool tile wall of the station, heart hammering harder than it should have been. Riley Owens wasn't just another pretty face on a train. She was becoming something else entirely. And he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending he was just some guy with a book and a cup of coffee. The next evening, the air was sharper, filled with the restless energy that only late fall could bring. Riley tugged her scarf higher around her neck as she hurried down the cracked sidewalk toward the station, her breath clouding in front of her. This time, she wasn't just anxious about missing the train. She was nervous in a way she hadn't been in years, like something important waited for her on the other side of those yellowed platform lights. As soon as she boarded, her heart gave a painful jolt. Asher wasn't in his usual seat. For a moment, panic flickered. Had she imagined everything between them? Had she built up nights of fleeting glances and half-spoken promises into something that was never real? She moved down the aisle, scanning, until a voice stopped her. "Over here." He was sitting farther back tonight, a different section, almost hidden behind a rusted pole. He held out a paper bag as she approached. "What's this?" she asked, taking it carefully. "Dinner," he said simply. "Figured you might not have had time." Inside was a neatly wrapped sandwich from a gourmet deli Riley had only passed by once, too intimidated by the gleaming glass counters and polished marble floors to step inside. She stared at him, stunned. "How did you? You mentioned yesterday you skipped lunch." His voice was casual, but his eyes were anything but. "I didn't think you were paying that much attention. You don't always realize when someone's listening." She sat down heavily across from him, her fingers tightening around the paper bag. "No one's ever done something like this for me before," she admitted, feeling strangely exposed. "You deserve it," Asher said, his tone steady. She unwrapped the sandwich and took a tentative bite, the flavors bursting across her tongue. It was a stupid thing to tear up over, but she had to blink hard anyway. They rode quietly for a few minutes, the usual clatter of the train filling the space between them. Then Asher leaned forward, his elbows braced on his knees. "Come with me tomorrow," he said. Riley paused mid-bite, frowning. "Come with you where? Just somewhere different." "Somewhere better than this train," she laughed, not unkindly. "You're being cryptic again," he smiled, a real one that softened the hard lines of his face. "I think you'll like it. I don't even know you." "Maybe it's time you did," her heart stumbled. Every cautionary instinct screamed at her to say no. She barely knew him. He could be anyone. But when she looked at him the steady way he met her gaze, the patience written into every line of his posture, something inside her quieted. "Okay," she said finally. "Where should we meet?" "I'll pick you up," he said firmly. "Where do you live?" She hesitated. Giving a near stranger her address wasn't exactly smart. Asher saw the flicker of doubt and added quickly, "Public place." "Somewhere you feel safe." There was a little coffee shop 2 blocks from her apartment, a place with peeling paint and chipped mugs, but it was familiar, comfortable. "Carter's Coffee," she said. "On 8th and Maple, noon," he nodded like it was already decided. The train jerked into motion again, and Riley tucked the sandwich bag into her coat, her fingers trembling slightly. "What should I wear?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He studied her for a long moment, then said, "Whatever makes you feel like yourself." Her cheeks warmed. That could be dangerous. I'm willing to risk it. The train began to slow, her stop approaching. She rose reluctantly. Asher stood too, not crowding her, just there, solid and steady. See you tomorrow, Riley. See you tomorrow, Asher. This time, when she walked up the cracked stairs into the night, she didn't feel alone. The next morning, Riley woke earlier than usual, nerves jangling through her like static. She pulled open her closet and stared blankly at the small row of clothes. Most were work uniforms or faded jeans. Nothing screamed impress a handsome stranger. After a moment's hesitation, she chose a simple navy sweater and black jeans. Comfortable, not trying too hard. The coffee shop was warm when she arrived, the scent of burnt espresso and old wood wrapping around her like a hug. She claimed a corner table by the window and wrapped her hands around a chipped mug of coffee, glancing out every few seconds. At exactly noon, a sleek black car pulled up outside. Her stomach flipped violently, the door swung open and Asher stepped out, not just the dark coat and jeans she was used to. Today he wore a crisp button-down under a cashmere jacket, and somehow he looked even more devastating. Heads turned as he entered the coffee shop, but his eyes found hers instantly, like there was no one else in the room. He crossed to her table in 3 long strides. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand. She hesitated only a second before slipping her fingers into his. His hand was warm, his grip sure. "Where are we going?" she asked as he led her outside. "You'll see." The driver opened the door for them, and for a moment Riley froze. This wasn't just a nice car. It was the kind of luxury sedan she'd only seen in movies, the kind with buttery leather seats and tinted windows. Asher noticed her hesitation but said nothing, just waited patiently. Heart hammering, she slid inside. The city blurred past as they drove, the noise and grit of her usual streets falling away, replaced by gleaming towers and manicured parks. When they stopped, Riley gasped. They stood before a towering glass building, sleek and modern against the sky. A doorman in a tailored uniform held the door open. "Asher," she said, voice strangled. "What is this place?" "My building," he said simply. She stumbled a step. "Wait, you live here?" He nodded, almost sheepish. "I wanted to show you something." Still dazed, she followed him inside. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and polished brass fixtures. A chandelier the size of her entire apartment hung overhead. In the private elevator, Asher slid a key card into a hidden panel. The elevator whisked upward silently. When the doors opened, Riley's breath caught. They stepped directly into a sprawling penthouse, all glass walls and warm wood, with a view that stretched out over the city like a living painting. She turned to him, heart slamming against her ribs. "You're rich," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Asher's mouth twisted slightly. "Yeah, like really rich, billionaire technically." Her knees almost gave out. She staggered to the nearest sofa and sat down hard. He crouched in front of her, his hands braced on his knees. "I didn't tell you because I wanted you to know me first," he said quietly. "Not the money, not the name." She stared at him, dazed. "Why me?" "Because you're real, you don't care about this." He gestured around the soaring penthouse. "You see people. Not price tags. I don't even know what to say. Say you'll stay for a while, let me show you the view." Riley looked past him, at the endless sky, the glittering city spread out like a dream. Maybe dreams didn't always come wrapped the way you expected. Maybe sometimes, they wore a dark coat and read a book across the aisle. Riley stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, her fingers lightly brushing the cool glass. The city stretched endlessly below her, the streets and buildings glowing like a sea of fallen stars. She had never seen New York from this high before. It made everything she thought she knew feel impossibly small. Asher watched her from a few feet away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, a rare uncertainty flickering across his face. "You hate it," he said quietly. She turned, startled. "No, it's incredible," her voice caught. "I just don't know what I'm doing here." He stepped closer, deliberate but careful, like he didn't want to push too hard. "You're here because I wanted you to see my real life." "All of it?" Riley crossed her arms, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions pressing on her chest. "Why would someone like you even notice someone like me?" Asher's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked almost angry but not at her. Because for the first time in years, I'm not invisible to someone who matters. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She hadn't expected that answer. She hadn't expected any of this. He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly younger, stripped of the cool confidence she'd seen on the train. I spent years surrounded by people who see what they want to see: money, status, advantage. His voice roughened. You looked right through all of that. You saw me. Riley sank onto the low couch behind her, her legs trembling too much to keep standing. I don't even know what I'm supposed to say. Don't say anything you don't mean. He moved to sit across from her, elbows resting loosely on his knees. I'm not asking you to change your life overnight. I just want you to know that I'm serious about this, about you. She stared at him, the words almost too big to fit into her mind. You don't even know everything about me. Then tell me. Her throat tightened. No one had ever asked her that and meant it. She tucked her hands between her knees to steady them. I grew up in the Bronx. My mom raised me alone. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I never went to college. I never even left the city. She laughed bitterly. I'm not exactly a trophy you can show off at some fancy gala. Asher leaned forward, his voice steady and sure. I'm not interested in trophies. I'm interested in the girl who still dreams about opening a bakery when the world keeps telling her no. Tears stung Riley's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She hated crying, especially here, in this place that felt like it belonged to a different universe. She forced a shaky laugh. You're either crazy or incredibly bad at picking people. Or maybe, he said, his mouth curving slightly, I just finally found someone worth fighting for. There was a long, charged silence between them, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. Riley stood abruptly, pacing to the window again. Her reflection ghosted back at her, pale and uncertain. I don't know how to fit into your world, she whispered. Don't. His voice was firm. I don't want you to fit into it. I want you to tear it apart and make it yours. She turned, heart pounding. Come with me tomorrow night, Asher said, standing too. There's a charity gala, boring, stuffy, overpriced. I have to go. I want you there with me. Panic flared in her chest. Asher, I'll take care of everything, he said quickly. You don't have to worry about clothes or anything else. Riley bit her lip, nerves warring with a wild, dangerous thrill. What if I embarrass you? You couldn't, he said simply. Even if you tried. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'll come. Relief flickered across his face, so raw and real that her chest ached. He crossed the room and pulled a sleek black card from a drawer, setting it on the table between them. Tomorrow morning, a car will pick you up. They'll take you to a boutique. Anything you want, it's yours. She stared at the card like it might bite her. I can't accept that. You're not accepting charity, he said, his voice low and fierce. You're accepting a date. Her laugh was watery but real. A date, huh? The first of many, if I have my way. She brushed her fingers lightly over the card, still not picking it up, still half afraid this was all some elaborate dream. Asher stepped closer, his voice dropping. I want you in my life, Riley, not just for tonight. Not just for tomorrow. Her heart felt too big for her chest. She lifted her chin. Then you better be ready for a girl who doesn't know which fork to use. He grinned, wide and boyish. I'll teach you. They stood there, the city sprawling behind them, the air between them charged with something electric and terrifying and wonderful. For the first time in a long time, Riley let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to ride the last train home alone forever. The next evening, Riley stood in front of the boutique's full-length mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress was a deep midnight blue, simple but stunning, the fabric clinging in all the right places without feeling uncomfortable. A stylist had swept her hair into soft waves, leaving a few strands loose to frame her face. She turned slowly, half expecting her reflection to laugh at her. Instead, she just saw a girl who looked scared and brave and heartbreakingly hopeful. When she stepped outside, the waiting car was sleek and gleaming under the streetlights. The driver opened the door silently, and she slid inside, clutching the small silver clutch they'd given her. The ride passed in a blur. Before she knew it, they were pulling up to a grand hotel draped in twinkling lights. The entrance was lined with photographers, flashes popping like fireworks. Panic clawed at her throat, and then she saw him. Asher stood at the top of the steps, a black tuxedo molding to his frame like it had been stitched just for him. His hair was neatly combed back, and when he saw her, everything else seemed to disappear. He descended the steps quickly, cutting through the crowd without hesitation. When he reached her, he didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. "You're beautiful," he said finally, his voice rough. She swallowed hard. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He laughed softly, then offered his arm. She took it, her hand fitting naturally into the crook of his elbow. They walked up the steps together, the world flashing and shouting around them, but all Riley could hear was the steady beat of her own heart. Inside, the ballroom was a glittering sea of chandeliers and polished floors, the air thick with expensive perfume and soft music. Asher guided her through it all effortlessly, introducing her to people whose names she immediately forgot, shielding her when the attention became too much, always staying close enough for his warmth to steady her. At one point, as they stood on the fringes of the dance floor, he turned to her, his eyes burning with something fierce and unshakable. "Dance with me," he said. She hesitated, nerves jangling. "I don't know how," she whispered. "I'll show you," he said, threading his fingers through hers and pulling her gently into the center of the floor. The music swelled around them, slow and haunting. Asher's hand slid to her waist, his other hand holding her securely. He moved with easy confidence, and after a few awkward steps, Riley found herself following his lead. They moved slowly, the world blurring around them. "I still feel like I'm dreaming," she said against his shoulder. He tightened his hold on her. "Then don't wake up." She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said, brushing a thumb lightly across her knuckles. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." Her chest ached with something too big to name. Before she could stop herself, she rose onto her toes and pressed her mouth to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative. Then Asher's hand slid into her hair, and he kissed her back like he'd been waiting forever. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me, Riley," he whispered. She closed her eyes, dizzy and giddy and aching. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered back, and for the first time she knew it was true. The night air was sharp when they finally stepped onto the rooftop terrace, the city glittering far below them like a field of stars. Riley clutched the railing to steady herself, the wind tugging at the loose strands of her hair. Asher stood behind her, silent for a moment, letting her soak it all in. "You brought me up here for a reason," she said without turning around. "I did," Asher replied, his voice low and steady. She faced him, the hem of her dress brushing against her ankles. The depth in his eyes made her chest tighten. It wasn't nervousness anymore. It was something heavier, something electric. "I grew up thinking love was a transaction," Asher began, his hands loose at his sides. "You give something, you get something, nothing free, nothing real." Riley stayed silent, sensing he needed to get the words out without interruption. "Meeting you," he hesitated, searching for the right words. "It made me realize I've never actually lived. Not really. I've built a life full of things, but none of it ever meant anything until you." The wind whipped around them, but Riley barely felt it. "I don't want a life that looks good on paper," Asher continued. "I want a life that feels like this, like you." Her throat closed, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out the city noise. "I know it's fast," he said, "and maybe crazy. But I'm done wasting time. I love you, Riley Owens." Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look away. Asher took a step closer, pulling a small velvet box from his coat pocket. He opened it without hesitation. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond set in a thin platinum band. "I'm not asking you to step into my world," Asher said, his voice raw. "I'm asking you to let me build a world with you. Will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, all she could do was stare. The city, the cold, the noise, it all fell away until there was only him. "You're serious," she whispered. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Riley let out a shaky laugh, then cupped his face in her hands. His skin was cool from the wind, but his eyes burned with heat. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Of course, yes." Relief and joy crashed across his face as he slid the ring onto her finger, his hands steady even as hers trembled. He kissed her then, without hesitation, without fear. It was a kiss that promised forever, a kiss that tasted like everything she'd ever been afraid to hope for. When they finally pulled apart, Asher rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. "I have one condition," Riley said, her voice rough with emotion. He pulled back slightly, eyebrows lifting in question. "I still want that bakery," she said. Asher's answering grin was wide and unguarded. "Then we'll build it together. Your name on the front window, your recipes on the shelves, whatever you want." She laughed through the tears, threatening to spill over again. "You'll regret promising that when you're stuck taste testing 100 kinds of muffins." "I'll consider it a privilege," he said, brushing a kiss against her temple. They stayed like that for a long time, clinging to each other on the rooftop while the city spun on below them, oblivious to the way two broken people had just found something whole. Months later, the bakery opened its doors on a quiet corner not far from the bustling downtown. The sign above the door read Riley's Hearth in looping gold script. Inside, the air always smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread, and laughter spilled out onto the street from morning until night. Riley stood behind the counter, her hands dusted with flour, watching Asher argue good-naturedly with a customer over the last chocolate croissant. He wore jeans and a worn leather jacket, his hair mussed from the wind, completely at ease in her world. When he caught her staring, he crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her close without caring that he dusted his jacket with flour in the process. "Mrs. Nolan," he murmured against her ear, the wedding band on his hand glinting in the afternoon light. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You're not getting out of helping with the dishes, you know." "Wouldn't dream of it," he said, kissing her soundly to the delighted cheers of the customers around them. Their life wasn't perfect. Some days the oven broke, or the deliveries were late, or they were both too tired to do more than collapse on the couch in a heap of tangled limbs. But it was theirs. Built from late-night train rides and dreams whispered between sips of bad coffee. And every night when the last light was turned off and the city settled into its restless hum, Asher would pull her close and remind her in 1,000 small ways that she wasn't invisible, not anymore. She was loved, fiercely, completely, forever.